Hey, I'm gonna give this a minute because it normally seems to take a minute before people will join. Um, Once people join, I'll start speaking. Maybe. We'll see. So, first of all, I want to say thank you if you join. I know it might be really early, so I appreciate you joining. Um, the Lord placed this on my heart. I hope that someone will hear this. He reminded me that this channel is about God's love. It's called God's Love Ministry for a reason, and that reason is, he told me to call it that. There's a whole story behind it, and I hope that I will get to share that testimony soon. But the whole reason why I'm here is to share and show His love. The wisdom that He's given me, the experiences that He's given me, I feel very blessed, but it's all out of love from Him, you know. Understanding the way in which He is forces you to fall more in love with Him. There's no way around it. So I'm really grateful, and I hope that's what people get out of this. So this is going to be the part 2 to, let me hold it here, the angle is better. This is the part 2 to my last video. If you miss it, I think it's going to save, so that'll be okay. But in the last video, I talked about some keys to understanding if the voice of God has spoken to you. Now, I didn't get into the nuances, the actual methods He uses, but just like the behind the scenes of, is this even the voice of God? That is key and will really help you a lot with determining, do I need to listen to this person? Is this what God wants for me to do? Is this me? Is this the enemy? So that's first and foremost, is understanding some keys about how the voice of the Lord sounds. There are probably some other keys, but I can't. Oh, my throat is acting up already. There's probably some other keys, but I can't quite recall them all at the moment, but that's what I know. And that's honestly enough. What I gave in the last post and the last video, it's honestly enough. You'll be good with that. So oh my gosh, I don't know why my throat is acting up so much. It's so annoying. Sorry. Dang. Anyways, so some of the keys that I talked about were hearing the voice of the Lord will instill peace and stillness and quickness of spirit. Hearing the voice of the Lord will draw you near to Him and cause a posture of humility. Hey Connor, how's it going? It also will affect your emotions, but not in a way in which we regularly understand them. There were a few more points. You'll have to watch the video too. Sorry, I cannot recall all that I said, but it's also in my latest post that I just posted. So that's the first part of it, knowing if it's from the Spirit of God. Next, taking those keys, we can understand if it's not from the Spirit of God. If something, if you start thinking something and you realize that this is making you kind of snowball, making you kind of there's a term for it in psychology and I can't think of the name of it. Like derail your thoughts and like escalate. I think there's another term, but whatever. Like you start to realize, oh, I feel this way, and then now your thoughts are racing and all of that. You've just heard the voice of a spirit. That's not even, I'm trying to think if I want to just talk about from a spirit and then talk about self or integrate it. I don't know which one would be more like easier to follow along with. Maybe I'll integrate it. So the voice of self looks different for different people, of course. However, there's a base level of logical understanding, that logical ways of thought that we all have. If it deviates from those ways, we are dealing with a spirit. When it starts to deviate from what is considered a normal, rational way of thought. Now, when I say dealing with a spirit, I don't mean that you're being possessed. I don't mean that at all. I don't mean that you have a spirit on you or anything like that possessing you. I don't mean that. It can be that, but not necessarily. It can be just as simple as a spirit whispering to you, because if you weren't aware, spirits have access to us on both sides. The only difference is that the Spirit of the Lord has access to us completely, whereas the spirits on the dark side of things, they have limited access. Thank God that they have limited access, right? But yeah, they can't get us in all the ways. They can't speak to us in all the ways that God can speak to us. He can speak to us in like 100 different ways or so. But the enemy can and will continue to try to speak to us. I actually believe that the enemy speaks more than God actually speaks, because when God speaks, there's typically, as I mentioned before, a call to him, to draw near to him, or an action. Sometimes you might see on here or know someone who says, God told me this, God told me that, God told me this, God told me that. I'll let you decide if you think that they're actually hearing from God or not. But it's always so interesting that people who continually have that disposition, they never have any work to do. They're always talking about people like they're here, there, and everywhere, because there is no stillness. I'll leave it with that. So the voice of the enemy is like constantly speaking, constantly trying to get to us. The voice of the Lord is also pursuing us, but not with the same aggression. That's a good word, aggression. So, if we had like a scale, if we had a scale, we would have in the middle what's logical, what's rational way of thought, and how we typically think about things. But rational and logic thinking would be like in the middle of that, right? And then we have one side over here and then one side over here. Both of them I don't want to say abandon logic. At least when it comes to God, I won't say abandon logic. That needs to also be understood, that if something comes from God, it's not that it's illogical, it's just that the logic of the situation comes second to what he says. Meaning, if God speaks, you should still have like one foot in reality. You should still be able to understand and feel things, rationalize things to a degree. It's just that you're not going to be led with a logic thinking mindset. That's the difference. By the way, I'm sorry if sorry that I'm not answering the comments and stuff. It's way too distracting, whether it's good, whether it's bad. I appreciate, people standing up for me and all of that, but I can't. I'll get so distracted. So, whether, see, just right there, I forgot what I was saying. When it comes to hearing from the Lord, you shouldn't abandon logic. Some people are like, God told me this, so now I gotta do this and this and this and this, and that's dangerous because you've now abandoned the logic of the situation. Like, you're here, there, and everywhere. There is no rationality to be had. I had someone say, oh, I heard from God something, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, okay, how did you hear from him? Oh, I don't know. I just figured. It's like, oh, yeah, no, that's not good enough. If you hear from the voice of the Lord, you are going to have what I like to call a spiritual receipt, where you can take that communication back to him and say, Lord Jesus, you said this to me. What does this mean? Instead of going ahead. Going ahead of him. Because we've learned that going ahead of him is, I won't say that doesn't necessarily mean that he hasn't spoken to you at all. It could just be issue of flesh. Like, he could definitely speak to you, but then your flesh is too built up to where you want to handle his communications in the way that you would handle fleshly communications, which that doesn't work. So, that has to be understood. So, you don't abandon logic when it comes to hearing or understanding the things of God. Logic and rationality just take a little bit of a backseat. If you get to a point where you have abandoned logic and rationality, understand that now you've veered from your logical thinking brain, from, how most human beings would understand something. Now you've gotten into a territory of the negative side of a spirit speaking to you. If you don't have any rationality, if there's no logic, if you start putting things together, like, have you ever heard someone who has had like a schizophrenic episode or a psychotic episode or something like that? And this is not to shame anyone, this is like a teaching thing. You'll realize that they start making their own like sense of logic, if that makes sense. Like, it's so like, how did you even get here? How did we get to this conclusion? They start like putting things together that frankly make no sense. So, to like your average person. So when you've gotten to that level, and that's an extreme obviously, but like, we do things on the daily that are very, or do things, think things that are pretty irrational on the daily. When we start getting in our feelings, and let's just say, hypothetically, like you see a couple and you're like, I don't have that. I'm probably never gonna have love. Like, that is such like a stretch, you know what I mean? But yeah, we normalize it, but it's still that kind of way of thought is, there's a term for it. I can't think of it at the moment. But know that it's coming from a place of flesh, to say the least. Um, it's certainly not rational. How you got from point A to point B, it makes no sense. But we normalize it. What's the term for it? Oh my gosh, it's killing me. I'm pretty sure there's a term for it. Yeah, I can't think of it. So whatever it is, maybe it'll come to me. But it's definitely carnal. Is that what I'm trying to think of? Maybe it is. No, 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 it's not carnal. Oh, it's not having a sound mind. That's what it is. That's the term I'm looking for. A sound mind won't jump to conclusions based off of really little facts, or facts that are so like, it's such a stretch how you got from like point A to point B. This is why on a personal note, I always feel very like around people who are very like quick to make judgments and stuff, because it's just like, okay, like you definitely only considered one side of this. It's very odd to me, very odd way of thinking, but many people think like that. Um and it's a lack of having a sound mind, and it's indicative of the transformative power of Christ not being made known in you, not being made perfect in you. Because, I mean, seriously, I wish I could like shake everyone up with this experience, with this testimony. I used to struggle with anxiety, I used to struggle with depression, I used to struggle with racing thoughts and all of that. And I even used to just accept like a normalized version of like, you have thoughts about this and that throughout the day and whatever. And it's not that the thoughts don't still come or potentially come. It's just that I know now that I have jurisdiction over them, so I don't have to take them on. I don't have to partner with those thoughts, if that makes sense. But before, I didn't know that. So I ended up like, my mind was just, I think I heard someone explain it like, it's like someone is constantly walking all over your mind, imprinting their thoughts, their views, their feelings. Um, and some of it is from the outside, and some of it is from self, because we don't realize that I'm taking on things that I have no business taking on. This is why that verse about take captive every thought that exalts itself above the things of Christ. If you meditate on that verse, you will see such a difference. That one, he keeps in perfect peace those whose eyes stay fixed on him. And then also, for God does not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. You meditate on those verses, you call out those spirits, you make it a daily thing, and you'll see that your mind will become, I, I don't want to say slower because that sounds bad, but slower in the sense that you won't have a whole bunch of nonsense in your mind. Your dreams will hopefully become clearer. Your ways of thought will be a lot less fleshly, so to speak. Um, because you're fixing on spiritual things and you're actually renewing your mind. And this is something that science talks about all the time. Psychology talks about all the time, that You can like reprogram and retrain. If you have a habit or something, you can break it. You can retrain your mind. But the beauty with the things of God is that he'll do all the heavy lifting for you. He'll recalibrate and retrain your mind, and you won't have to do very much, You just call upon his name and you're good to go. So anyways, the voice of self, the voice of self and the voice of enemy of the enemy, wow, is interesting because it's really, it's hard to distinguish, to be honest. The reason why it's hard to distinguish is because why can't I speak? Oh my gosh, Lord Jesus help me. The reason why it's hard to distinguish is because we are all naturally carnal beings. So our soul is us and it's our natural disposition. In order to hear the voice of God, you'll have to have your flesh broken down. There's no way around it. You have to come to the end of self. I've said this before. And so if you have too much self, too much soul built up, you're going to have a difficult time understanding the communications of God. That's just how that works. And on the other side of that, you're actually going to have a difficult time understanding the communications of spirit in general, because God will speak in opposition to the things of the flesh. There's a verse and it says, the spirit lusts after the flesh or the soul, depending on the translation, and the soul after the flesh, and something like they're both always at odds with one another. The Lord will speak in opposition to the things of the flesh. So it's very easy to miss it and hard to hold on to. And that's what we call faith. Spirits, on the other side of things, do not speak from a spirit from the words of the spirit. They don't. Spirits will speak from a position that validates flesh. There we go. Thank you, Lord. They'll validate flesh. So that is why it's super difficult to be able to understand the difference, because they will validate flesh. They will egg on. So say you're like in a bad situation or something. Something happened and you're a little bit down. The voice of self, depending on what kind of person you are, you might say, well, this happened, but tomorrow's a new day, or something like that. And that could just be you, or that could be in partnership with how the Lord has spoken to you. If you're hearing from the enemy, though, what that will look like is you're having a bad day, and then you'll start recalling that happened during this day, and that happened. Oh yeah, and what about this? And you'll start picking things apart. You'll start looking at self and really beginning to hate self and all this stuff. Like, again, you'll start to derail, or there's another term for it, and it's really bothering me. But you'll start to lose your grip on reality, because you'll get so emotional that all you can see is negativity. You could have had like maybe a not great day at work, and then you come home and then it's just like, man, I had such a bad day at work. I'm just such a terrible person, or something like that, just something kind of like, whoa, where'd that come from? And it'll just get worse and worse and worse. When you start entertaining the voice of flesh or emotions, And I suppose it doesn't have to be bad or negative emotions either. It could be good emotions. It could be trying to think of an example of like good emotions, or it could be the flesh. Well, anything that doesn't push you closer to the Lord is of flesh. That doesn't necessarily make it bad. That doesn't make it wrong. That's just what that is. And anytime you are listening to the voice of flesh, that makes you vulnerable. This is hurting my pinky. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Um yeah, it makes you vulnerable. So you will, again, it's not wrong. Oops. Sorry. It's not wrong. Um we are by nature carnal creatures. We are. We all have that aspect to us, and that's just how it is. There's no, on this side of the heavens, there's no killing that, and that's fine. But just know that it does make you vulnerable. So the voice of the enemy partners with flesh and is hard to, if you're not edified spiritually, you will not be able to tell. This is why, I know this is going to be a little bit of a controversial take here in a second, but this is why people take on so many different identities outside of their Christ identity, whatever that is and whatever that looks like. It's not a specific thing. I'm not talking about sexual or anything like that. I'm talking about like literally any identity that you find validity in outside of how you were made, your God ordained identity that God has created for you, that He's bestowed upon you, that He has called you to walk in. Anything outside of that is going to put you in a vulnerable position, spiritually, anyways. People who find identity in things outside of their calling, outside of what God has called them to be. They have an idol. Point blank, period. And this is not me pointing my finger at anyone, because you can be in the church and have an idol. You can be in the church and have an identity crisis. Okay? People like the Pharisees, for instance, people who are overly religious, identity issue. They have an idol. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's clear. So people take on identities thinking that it's actually them, and it's actually the enemy that has spoken to them. And this is why, just talk about this briefly, this is why the Lord has issues with us identifying as this, as that, whatever the case is. Again, it can look like anything. But the reason why is because you are speaking, you're partnering with spirits that are not Him, that He has not ordained for you. You're coming into agreement with things that He did not call you to be. And this is actually true even for us in the faith. There's this verse that I don't think people take as seriously as they should, but I can't remember the reference. It's somewhere in the New Testament. I want to say it's in Matthew, but it says something like, if you call a brother or sister a fool, you're in danger of hellfire. We don't take that verse serious enough, because what he's saying is, when you look down on someone and you want to judge them and you want to call them stupid, or you want to call them, you're not doing the work of the Lord, or whatever the case is, 9 times out of 10, it's not coming from a godly place. It's not coming from a place of wanting to help them or correction or anything like that. Most of the time, it's coming from a place of pride, jealousy, whatever it is, not from his spirit. When you label someone outside of what God has ordained them, it's like you're playing God. It's also a form of witchcraft, to be honest. It's not very giving someone a name, like just as simple as like you're stupid. God didn't make anyone stupid. We all have different intellectual capabilities, and that's okay, but that doesn't mean that anyone is too above anyone else that, you know, you can't get on my level. To be honest, I mean, thank the Lord. He's given me a measure of intelligence, but my intelligence has grown so much more by his spirit. And it's only that, you know. But if I ever start to think like you're not on my level, I'm in serious danger because I'm partnering with the spirit of pride. I'm literally doing the work of the devil at that point. But I don't think we take this seriously because we'd see a whole lot less pointing the fingers, not only within the community, but at the world. You know, people want to call people this and that, and it's like, okay, those without sin cast the first stone, you know? It's ridiculous. But anyways, I don't want to deviate. So, the voice of spirits plays on emotions a whole lot. You'll be feeling one way in a spirit, and it might be rooted in some amount of validity, but then a spirit will start speaking to you, and then you will start feeling worse and worse and worse. You know, when people say, like, I just got hit with a wave of depression? Yeah, that's not a random thing. That's not a random occurrence. That's because a spirit is speaking to you and you feel really bad. And that's the proof that a spirit is speaking to you. If, for most general people, if you just randomly feel bad, you can reel it in because you still have your feet and logic and rationality. You can say, I need to stop talking about myself like that. I need to do better, you know? Dang it, I'm not a loser, blah, blah, blah. But if you've gotten to the place where the reality or logic, rationality is kind of gone, then that means you're fully listening to a voice of the spirit. I really wish I could remember that term where it's like, oh, spiraling. There we go. Ha. Okay. Yay. Spiraling. That's what it's called. When you spiral, that is no longer coming from a place of rational way of thought. Spiraling is indicative of you listening to a spirit because it doesn't make sense. If someone were to like hear you while you're spiraling, while you're speaking, it's like, are you good? You need some help, okay? Like, spiraling. Clear example of hearing from a spirit. So, spirits prey off your emotions. They can make you feel really, really good. And by the way, again, if it's not clear, I don't mean you are literally hearing like in your ears. I mean, this is taking place in your soul or in your mind, which the soul is composed of the mind. If you are literally hearing voices, I would recommend you get some help for that. You know, you need some deliverance because that's no one wants to live like that. You're not crazy, but you do need some deliverance. But when I'm talking about hearing from a spirit, I'm talking about, or bat spirits from the dark side of things, I'm talking about on your soul, in your mind, not audibly. If you're hearing audibly, you're being tormented. And that's why I said in the last video, there's a fine line between hearing from the voice of God and being crazy. Because when you open yourself up spiritually, you're just open spiritually. If you're open spiritually and you're listening to the wrong voices and there's too much flesh, you can find yourself in a place of what looks like psychosis, what looks like schizophrenia, what looks like anything related. I don't know what other terms there are, but anything related. Whenever you actually have someone who has, there's a lot of different mental illnesses. And again, some of them started from a totally like valid place, and what the person is experiencing is real, what you might be experiencing is real, but that doesn't mean that there's not a spiritual element to it. But when we're talking about like schizophrenia and we're talking about stuff like that, that's completely spiritual. That is my personal belief, that is my personal conviction, that it's completely spiritual. I don't believe that I mean, I guess it can start out from a place of trauma, but it definitely, at that point, like, your mind is gone, you know what I mean? So it's like it's no longer just it's not like someone who's just like a little bit anxious, has social anxiety, and, freaks out a little bit when meeting someone new. We're talking about someone who like has mostly, in the most extreme, someone who is so far gone that that's the normal state of their mind, and every once in a while they might have some moments of clarity, but most of the time it's not like that. um so that's something to look out for, to be honest. And the other reason why I say that, not only, I mean, people are going to think, whenever someone talks about hearing from the Lord or whatever, people are going to talk about or think like, oh, you're crazy or something like that. And that's just how that's going to be. But another reason to know this is because sometimes people who are experiencing psychosis or are schizophrenic or something like that, sometimes they themselves think that they're hearing from God. And that's a major issue, because how is the person running down the street like naked with the tinfoil hat on saying, you know, God told me that the government is spying on all of us, blah, 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 blah. How are they going to say that? And then here's someone else saying, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Like, who do you believe? So there needs to be a distinction made there. Because if it's the same thing, that's a little bit weird. That's a little bit of a discrepancy. So, yeah. Anyways, that's all I have to say about that. So, what's indicative of a spirit speaking is spiraling. Glad I remember that word. When you start to get too in your emotions, good or otherwise, manic episodes has a spiritual component to it, 100%. Some of the times when and I'll just be honest, like, as understanding the communications of God, again, it's a journey, right? There were times when I've gotten it wrong. There are times when, to be honest, it looked like, or I assumed, or I thought like, oh, that's the voice of God, and no, it wasn't. And if I had stayed in that place, I'd end up in a hospital or something like that, because it's like, how do I move on from there? How I move on from there is that the Lord showed me you got that wrong. But that doesn't mean that I'm not with you. That doesn't mean that I'm not speaking to you. You're going to get things wrong. I used to have this attitude, and I realized that now it was honestly pride, but I had this attitude that um I really shouldn't get anything wrong, because if I get something wrong, then that means that I'll have nothing to stand on. I'll have no way of understanding if it's God or not. That was from a really, really immature place. Um, because that would imply that like I have perfect understanding of God and his communications, and that's just not true. That will never be true. Thank God, because I couldn't handle it. Oh, sorry. um I'm looking at some of the comments. Thanks, Drea, for the for standing up for me. I appreciate it. Um, People just be, how they are. Anyways, so yeah, spirits will speak from a place of emotion and feed off of your emotion, especially if it's negative, but it can be positive. Biggest key there is it rooted in any logic? Can I reel in logic, or have I gone too far? Have I gone off the deep end? Like, okay, let's look at this thing rationally. That's actually probably one of the biggest indications of a spirit speaking to you versus, or a negative spirit, I should say, versus the spirit of God. That very emotional, no rationality or ability to be rational, all that. Number 2, it'll make you feel really bad. Makes sense, because if they're feeding off your emotions, actually, let me, it typically will make you feel bad. It can also make you feel really, really good. But again, you have to look for that loss of rationality, loss of logic, loss of reasoning. But more often than not, it'll make you feel really bad, like dread kind of bad. It'll make you feel depressed. It'll make you feel all those things that are so far from how God sees you. When you start feeling things or believing things where it's so opposite in the way that God sees you, you're listening to his spirit. In case you need to know how God sees you, he sees you with the best of, in the best light possible. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, how far you've gotten from him. It doesn't matter. He legitimately sees you like you're a newborn baby to him. I don't know. Or the love of his life or something like that. Like that is his continued view of you. It doesn't matter whether you claim him, whether you don't claim him. It doesn't matter. Like sorry. He sees you with heart eye emoji. Like that's his continued disposition towards you, which is really beautiful. Sorry, I keep leaning on my leg. So just by knowing that, anything short of that, you know that it ain't from him. And if it's not, what business do you have taking on that view of self, that negative view of self, that negative identity? Why would you do that if that's not how you actually are, if that's not what you're called to be? If he doesn't see you in that way, you don't have any business seeing yourself in that way. That's actually what helped me a lot, what set me free a lot when it came to um, deliverance from the spirit of fear. That verse that talks about, it says, for God does not give us a spirit of fear. Excuse me. And I was like, oh, okay, well then if fear is not from God, then what am I doing? You know, why am I partnering with this idea? I literally have no business doing that, and I'm good. Now it wasn't like that. Like I had to fight. I had to like meditate on it day and night. But it did make me realize this is not of God, so I don't need to have anything to do with it. So emotions and making you feel bad, making you feel good, either one. The voice of the enemy will point you towards self. It'll point you towards self. It'll point you towards self. This can look like a good or a bad thing. In fact, when I'm talking about identities outside of our Christ ordained identity, most of the time, you know, we find validation in these things that we consider good. But anything that draws you away from the Spirit of God is just inherently not good for you, not long term, anyways. Actually, I probably shouldn't have said it like that. To be honest, it's just not good for you. It might feel good, it might seem good on the surface level, but it's not good for you. So it'll point you more towards self than and obviously simultaneously away from God. Closely related to that, it'll get you to focus on your circumstances. I didn't pick my nose. I itched my nose. Okay. It'll get you to focus on your circumstances. That is so indicative of the voice of the enemy. Because guess what? The enemy doesn't know your future. So that's all he's got, to be honest. The role that he can play is look at you. God promised you blah 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 and you're still here. One of the reasons why Satan's test to Jesus was an effective test was because he tried to give him comfort and speak to the here and the now. Because this was before Jesus was... This was before he was released to do what he needed to do. So, if he hadn't actually been from God, it would have been... Those seeds of doubt could have been really potent for him. If that makes sense. So, he'll draw you away from God, towards self, and also give you a sense of comfort. He will give you a sense of comfort with what he says. Yes, this is why there is a difference between the peace of the Lord and the peace of the world. Sometimes the enemy will speak using the most logical of things, like obviously, like, you know, if God tells you to do something, well, let me make this clear. If God tells you to do something, there is going to be, as I said earlier, there's going to be something required of us called faith. And whether we like it or not, what makes faith faith is the lack of being able to fully understand. Not being able to fully understand is where faith comes in. But if we're not fortified in spirit, what'll end up happening is where we're supposed to have faith, we will give in to doubt and we will give in to the voice of the enemy. So that's how that works. But whenever God speaks, it's always going to challenge your circumstances, challenge your view of self, challenge your view of him. If he truly has spoken, you'll have like a difficult time with honestly picking up what he said. It's like it'll be like the exact opposites of what he said. Okay. Of what he said. So sorry about that. um it threw me off. So the voice of the enemy will cause you to spiral, get you too in your emotions, good or bad, point you away from God, point you towards self and logic of a situation. One interesting thing I found, oh my gosh, sorry, I'm not even in the frame. What the heck? One interesting thing that I found about how the Lord works when it comes to like promises and when he's spoken something over your life, when he's given you something, is he's gonna test you in a way that it's gonna be the exact opposite. So if he is telling you something, you are going to, that won't be your situation, and your situation will probably get worse. And I talked about this before, so I'll leave it there. But yeah. Anyways, so feelings, we got feelings, we got point you away from God, point you towards self, point you towards the situation. Trying to think what else, what I might be missing. Help me, Jesus. Won't give you stillness in mind. So what you'll experience is the spiraling thing that I was kind of talking about, where you're starting to put stuff together. You're starting to like all on your own. You're starting to say, oh, well, maybe I need to do this and this and this and this. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that dramatic. An example, a biblical example. Sarah heard from God. She said, the angel of the Lord spoke to her and said, you're going to have a baby, right? She couldn't comprehend it. So what'd she do? She started making her own plans. Be careful of making your own plans. Sorry. Making your own plans is comfortable. That's another point. Making your own plans is comfortable and it makes sense and it's logical, but it is not typically, if ever, to be honest, from the Spirit of God. Like, it's just not. Whenever, and that goes back to the whole faith thing. If you're going to have faith in God, you're going to be uncomfortable. Just understand that. Um So be careful of something that can give you comfort if you want to walk in the things of the Spirit. Be careful of that thing. As someone said, the enemy can open doors too, and that he can. And to be honest, actually, after the Lord speaks, what happens spiritually is it's like, actually, it depends on how he speaks to you. If he speaks to you in the more profound ways, like audibly or in a specific encounter or something like that, other spirits may be aware of what he has said to you, and it'll be the immediate mission of the enemy to come in and try, and it talks about this with um it's the parable about the seed sown in good soil versus rocky soil and all of that. If the enemy can, he will take from you whatever the Lord told you is true. Sorry, I'm not in the frame. Anyways, he will take he'll try his best to take it from you if he can. So one of the ways in which he does this is to give you something that almost looks like that goes along with what the Lord has said. For instance, the Lord told me to leave my last job, and I kind of knew why, but I didn't fully know why. But I knew that. And once I started to, I like went back and forth about it with him. But once I actually started to make those plans, I started kind of do the Sarah thing, and I'm like, well, maybe he means this. Maybe I should try this. Maybe I should try that. I'll never forget, there was this opportunity that came my way. It was so perfect. Oh my gosh, I wanted it so badly. But I remembered I needed to ask the Lord if this was of him. I would have gone in on it. I don't think like it would have honestly came together because it just wasn't his plan for me, but I would have wasted time and energy and everything in trying to go down that route if I hadn't realized, oh, this isn't from God in the first place. But an opportunity came my way, and I thought, this is the Lord. This is of him. Little did I know it was not. It was definitely not. It was what we call counterfeit. Counterfeit doesn't have to just be, you might have heard that term before. Counterfeit is not just counterfeit, God told me like who I'm going to marry. Counterfeit husband comes your way. Counterfeit wife comes your way. It's not necessarily just that. It can also be situations. It can also be opportunities. That's probably more common, actually. The most common. Because just because something looks good, just because an opportunity presents itself, doesn't mean it's from the Lord. So, spirits won't give you a stillness. Negative spirits won't give you a stillness in your spirit. You'll feel equipped to do things on your own, put things together on your own. It'll be the opposite of what's called a quickness in spirit, actually, ironically, because being quickened in spirit means just to be made alive in spirit. And if you're made, the only true way you can be made alive in spirit is connecting with the Lord. Outside of that, you're fooling yourself. You might be alive in soul, and if you don't know any better, you'll think they're the same thing, but they're not. And so when you start feeling incentivized to go ahead of God, there's a potential that you're listening to a voice of the Spirit. When it takes you from the things of God, voice of the Spirit. When it has you looking towards self, voice of the spirit. When it's comfortable, there's a really good chance it's the voice of the spirit. When you start losing your grip on reality, there's a chance that it's the voice of the spirit, or it is the voice of the spirit. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think those are like the main things. I'm pretty sure those are the main things. Those are the main things. So it's important to know that if you take away anything from this, it's important to know that if you are going to hear from the voice of the Lord, you have to have an understanding of who He is in a very real way. Not from what someone else said, not from someone else's example or story or testimony. It has to be made real to you. That's where He wants to meet all of us. He wants to have a testimony with every single person. Every single one of us should have at least one testimony, okay? Honestly, more than one, but we should at least have one. That is how God wants to meet us, because that's the whole point of it. That's the whole relationship aspect of it, that He wants to meet us in that deep and intimate way. And when you start having those kind of encounters with the Lord, it'll be easier. It won't be automatic, because again, it's an ongoing thing, but it'll be easier to tell this is the Lord, this is not the Lord. I don't know if he wants me to talk about self, because that's kind of something where it kind of depends from person to person. Some people are naturally like skeptical people. That's not necessarily like a negative spiritual thing, at least to my understanding. Some people just are naturally a little more analytical, a little more like I need to see the facts type people, and they might have a measure of skepticism to them. And there's some people who are just really like, okay, whatever, just go along with whatever. But yeah. Trying to think about anything else about the voice of self that I might be able to give you. You just gotta know self to be able to know the voice of self. Like, um, you gotta spend time with yourself as well. That is something that once you have a better grip on understanding how God speaks and even understanding how the enemy speaks, you'll be able to kind of, by reason of those things, understand if it's just self. Because to be honest, most of the time our thoughts and everything are, how do I say this? They are endorsed by spirits. So that, like, yeah. Most of the time they're not like just our own entirely own thing. They can be, but most of the time it's not. Because how it works, and this is going to be my last point, is that, we have a disposition actually as human beings to have kind of a negative way of looking at things. I believe that's just the inherent sin nature of us. Because of this disposition, it also makes us more vulnerable to hearing the enemy, because we're speaking the same language, because the language of the enemy is negativity, by the way. Yeah, of the enemy. Um I forgot the main point I was gonna make, to be honest, but once we stop speaking, so we develop a pattern of how we think about things. You know, for instance, I saw this thing, and I swear this will be my last point, but I saw this thing where there was this lady who, I think it was like, what's that show, like my 600 pound life or whatever it's called, 400 pound life, whatever it is. And there were so many comments like saying, oh, this is so sad, blah blah blah. But there were a lot of people saying, oh, she's hopeless, there's no way, a lot of those kind of comments. And to be honest, from a totally like logical perspective, you're not wrong. However, that's not the spiritual side of things. That's not a spiritual view of things. So when we see the surface level and we see someone as hopeless, someone who's too far gone, God is always looking at them with a hopeful disposition. And if he says otherwise, it will be otherwise. But if you're not spiritually sensitive, you won't be able to see that, unfortunately. And so we've developed an attitude of looking at things from a negative and a very surface level position. And we have to undo that, if that makes sense. We have to undo that disposition. And the only way for that to take place is if our flesh is broken down. Because if logic is telling you, everything is terrible, everything is falling apart, the only safeguard you have against that are things of the spirit. You've tried everything and nothing is working. You have to have something. This is why, like even we'll seek advice from someone who, you know, is not in our situation because we want like an outside perspective. We need something more. It's like the same thing with understanding things of the spirit, if that made sense. That was kind of a weird like example, but we need something. We need someone from an outside perspective, but even more outside than fellow human beings. I'm ending this here. I hope this helped. Um, that's all. I'll be back if he gives me something else. God bless.